Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games, games that respect your time. I'm Raygan Kelly, and I'm joined this week by one fantastic co-host.
Laura Nash, hello.
Hi, Laura. How you doing?
Good. We are finding a way to sneak book club into the main topic episode, which I'm thrilled about.
Yes. Yeah, listener, let's be honest here. Just gonna lay it all out there. Two of our co-hosts canceled on us. We had to come up with something real quick. And you know what happens when you're trying to think of an episode topic real quick? You look around the room. You look left. You look right. You know what's to my right? A bookshelf.
It's on my left. And that's how we came up with video game books.
Yeah, fortunately, this is something we both had something to say about. You know, we did a little brainstorming. Here we are. But you know what? We've both got some bookshelves in our rooms, and both of them have some video game related books on them. And we just thought we'd kind of do a little chit chat about what types of video game related books we buy, some recommendations, anything else that happens to come to mind. So that's what we're going to do. And if you, listener, have any suggestions of video game related books that you have enjoyed, hopefully you'll enjoy this. And also, we would love some recommendations. This is something that we always love to hear about. So send those our way. How do we want to do this, Laura? Do we want to sort of go back? I was going to say round robin, but it's not really round when there are two people, is it? Why don't you start, Laura, and we'll figure it out from there.
We can go category by category because
good point.
I think when I'm very seldomly advertised video game books on Instagram because they're like selling me clothes instead. But when I am actively looking for video game books on the internet, what I'm getting returned to me is a lot of history books, a lot of kind of why this game came to be. And I generally like that, but it's hard when your specialty is short games because most of the books are written about long games. So when I started looking at video game books, the very first thing I ran to was concept art or art books, because those you can find for the smallest little gems in the world. I know this is something you love. I believe South Scrimshaw, you talked about buying the book. So I want to hear about your favorite video game art books first. What are your treasures? What do you?
Yeah, this is something that I do for a very particular reason that's a little bit silly, but the South Scrimshaw one is a great example of I played this game. I loved the art. I bought this is a digital art book. They just had a PDF, but I just wanted to see more pictures by that person. That's actually not really why I buy most of the video game books that are on my shelf. What I end up doing a lot of is, I'm a retro game enthusiast. I like old video games, old game consoles. And I also just don't have the room and money, honestly, for a massive collection of cool looking old video games, right? I love looking at video game boxes and you know how it is. You see these people with these prestige shelves full of thousands of video games, right? I can't do that. I don't have what it takes to be the guy that has the massive YouTuber wall behind him with
alas.
Earthbound on it and whatnot. I do all of my retro video gaming mostly on, I have a lot of old consoles, but I play a lot of things on things like the Mister or emulation or things like that where I'm booting things up off of a text list of ROMs, it's all just text and, at most maybe a listicle of best video games I go and consult. And so what I found that I really like to do is for systems that I really enjoy, I like to buy books that are kind of function as a little bit of a replacement for the experience of staring at a wall of games. So I'll hold a couple of these up for the camera.
I buy poster books of poster art for the same exact reason, because I only have so many walls. So
here's a couple of examples of ones that I really enjoy. This one is called SNES/Super Famicom, an unofficial visual compendium. It's from Bitmap Books. It's in this incredibly beautiful hard case, slip cover. It's like a box kind of thing. It's a beautiful hardback book. And it's a beautiful book. There are some really nice little essays in it, but most of it is large, full bleed screenshot images of video games. Just huge page after page of screenshots and little short articles about what's interesting about various different games. And what I like about this one is like you can just open this up and leaf through it. And on every single page, there's a thing where you're like, I don't think I've ever played that. That's really interesting. Look at this beautiful screenshot. Read this short description of the game. Tells you like what the genre and like what the year it came out, and maybe, you know, a few paragraphs about what's interesting about like Super Adventure Island or something like that, you know? And this is something that I like to do. I like just, you know, pull this up, open, leaf through it, and basically kind of treat this as like, here's suggestions of games that I haven't played. And there are some nice essays in here. There's, you know, essays in here about different features of the SNES, or, you know, like the, you know, description of what is interesting about Mode 7 or things like that. And it's one of these beautiful sort of coffee table style books. It's a big, heavy art book full of beautiful screenshot images and stuff. This is a great one. I have a similar one also, the similar unofficial visual compendium for the NES. Really nice. By the way, you won't be able to see this, listeners, but the covers of these have these like lenticular thing where you get these like sort of animated sprites on the cover of the book, which I think is cool.
It does look really cool, listener. I can vouch that the sprites are beautifully colorful and they look very shiny on the camera.
These are wonderful. And these are the kind of books where, like, you know, this is a book you love to hold. You know, it's beautiful to hold. It has like multiple little, you know, old school books would have the little built-in ribbons that you would use to hold your place. Do you know that? Like sometimes you get, this has like 5 of them because you're gonna be wanting to mark them all. And they're like in thematic colors, like the NES, like gray ribbon, or like the colors of the controller buttons on the Super Famicom. Like gorgeous books. Somebody put an incredible amount of work into these. Bitmap Books has a lot of great stuff. The visual compendiums come in and out of availability. If they're available, I think you should get them. I think they actually come out to be kind of a great deal. But Bitmap Books also has more sort of like books that are focused on things like particular genres. They have if I'm remembering correctly, I think they're the ones that have there's this book about beat 'em ups that I've had my eye on for a while that like it looks really great. I do have one other of theirs that I'll point out that is maybe even more to the purpose that I was just describing, where I kind of treat it as like almost like the browsing interface for my ROM collection in a way. It's a little silly to say, but like that's kind of how I treat these books. And this is one that I love even more. This is Super Famicom, the box art collection. This is a huge square format hardcover book. The cover's not that impressive. It's kind of just a black cover with like a gold embossed logo. But the cool thing about this book is that it's just box art. It's just box art specifically from the Super Famicom. The Super Famicom had amazing box art. Just absolutely fantastic looking boxes. They had this interesting format for the game boxes. They were taller than they are wide. And so every one of them looks kind of like a little miniature poster. And in the US, I think after the Atari crash, there was a big effort to like get the game boxes to like show you more accurately what a game is supposed to actually look like. So like that's why you get, you know, in the NES era, the boxes, many of them had literally just like paintings of pixel art. You kind of understand how people arrived there, you know, the sort of like feeling of like false advertising when you buy a game for the Atari 2600 that has like a, you know, really exciting cover and it's a bunch of squares shooting dots at each other. And the sort of feeling of false advertising of that. You understand why we ended up where we did, but American box art for years was kind of hampered by this sort of lack of imagination. And Japanese game box art just didn't suffer from that. And it looks like beautiful movie poster art. And so like every single page here is just a beautiful box art image and like several paragraphs about what the game is. And, you know, obviously this, you know, it'd be impossible for this to include literally every game, but it's a great selection. All the heavy hitters, but also like shovelware that has an interesting box, or like, you know, licensed games. Here's the box art for, you know, a Godzilla game from the Super Famicom. I'm sure that the game itself is probably mediocre, but gosh, that box art is great. Like really cool looking stuff. And I love browsing through this, being like, that box looks awesome. Booting up the ROM and like maybe it's something that I've never even heard of and I try it and it's cool for half an hour, or maybe it's like absolutely disappointing. But like nothing is as true to like the experience of like games in the 90s as like, oh, let me boot up this game because the box looked awesome and it
You
sucks.
were shopping at
Exactly.
at the Blockbuster rental store section where you can get video games, and you were judging a book by a cover, taking it home, installing the ROM, and playing it for 30 minutes and being like, wow, that was a waste of my weekend choice of video game rental.
Yeah. And that's an experience that's very hard to reproduce today. So that's one of the reasons I really love these books, is like they're a great way to kind of like get like, I literally think of them as like an alternate browsing experience for ROMs, which is a silly thing to say, but like they're great. So if you like that experience, just like looking at cool pictures of video games, go look up the Bitmap Books website. They've got a ton of different stuff. Everything comes in and out of stock there. They'll like release a new book. It'll be available for a short while, and then it'll go out of availability. Then they'll do another printing. You can get on their wait list or like, you know, mailing list or whatever. So I would definitely recommend checking them out. Let me see. A couple others in that vein that I'll just quickly mention. This one Shane gave me as a birthday present at some point. This one's called Artcade, and it is almost the exact same thing, but it's just the what do you call those? The panel at the very top of an arcade machine, the like marquee where it usually shows the title. It is a book all of the marquee art above arcade machines. Awesome art sometimes, like really cool. Similar kind of thing to that Super Famicom one. It's just picture after picture of like that cool image above the screen in the arcade machine that, you know, you'd see from across the room and be like, "Ooh, that looks cool. I wonder what that is." And then this one is not from Bitmap Books, but it's another one in a very similar vein. This is a book called, let me get the actual title right. Sega Mega Drive / Genesis Collected Works. This one is similar to those Bitmap Books ones, but what I like about this one, it has tons of incredible just art, you know, just full page, beautiful art, and some nice articles, you know, including some by people who are, you know, deeply involved in the development of the Sega Genesis. But it also includes like patent artwork and like concept artwork from the Sonic games, and like, you know, the poster artwork that would have become the title pages for the cover images for some of the games, but minus their, you know, like marketing copy and whatnot, like the you know, paintings, sprite art that was like, you know, illustrations of characters that, you know, before they went to you know, make the sprite art out of them. Just a really, really cool book. And it also has it has this kind of clever bit at the end where it's literally just sprites. Like there's this, you know, page after page of like, here's a town from Phantasy Star. Here are some scrolling backgrounds from beat 'em ups all lined up against each other. Here are, you know, little miniature screenshots, 16 of them on a page, like lots and lots of sprite art and things like that. Just full of like intriguing little details. So this one is also great. I highly recommend that one as well. And if you have suggestions, listeners, for like particular books that you feel the same way about, let me know, because this is a genre where like I'm always kind of like on the lookout for these. They make great gifts. They're something like, you know, if you know somebody loves the Sega Genesis, who wouldn't want you know, a 5-pound hardcover book full of screenshots from their favorite games and, you know, articles by the creators and like, you know, background art and things like that. So, you know, really cool stuff.
Well, that reminds me of when I went to see the Victoria and Albert exhibit a while back. They talked a lot about how difficult it is to share the cool stuff about games, especially if you've moved from boxes to ROMs. If you don't have, like, if your favorite moment in a game is 5 hours in and you want to show your friend, you can either spoil the heck out of them by finding a clip on the internet and take 30 minutes, or you could open up a book and show them how cool the game looks. I don't always get to do that. Speaking of which, I'm going to jump ahead in my stack of books, but I've got a book that's just unhelpfully called Video Games. But I think if you search Video Games Victoria and Albert, it will be the only book that comes up, because it's not like other people are publishing it. But correction. It's called Video Games Design, Play, Disrupt, because that's the title of the exhibition. but it is articles generally written by the developers of each of the games they featured in the exhibit, like Journey, Bloodborne, League of Legends, Splatoon, Last of Us, Kentucky Route Zero, Overwatch, No Man's Sky. How do you do it? Which is how do you have sex game? Like a tiny indie.
That was Nina Freeman, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've covered one of her games on the show, Celeste.
Yeah, so
not Celeste, not Celeste. What was it called?
It was called Sibylline.
Sibylline. There's another C name. Thank you.
But there's an article by Nina Freeman and Robert Yang called "A Conversation on Sex and Intimacy in Games," talking about all of that. They have a article on what it is like to do a very personal game. In this case, it was called "Rinse and Repeat," about like your culture, and then called "Prototyping Personal Experience." I found, and I reached for it quite a lot when we did the Kentucky Route Zero game. You can hear me just cribbing straight out of the article. All of the articles about how you get physical art to inspire video games by the Kentucky Route Zero folks. And the Road to Journey, where they talk about how they made Journey. It's got sketches of concept art. I will not talk about, but I will show to Raygan so he can go, ooh, ah. Beautiful pictures from Journey of scale, where they talked about like how small should the character be at different parts of the game. So they play with, different versions of, should you have eyes that look like a certain gender, or should it be a genderless blob? How should the scarf move? There's different drawings of scarf physics. And then they also have very strange things from Last of Us of various fungal things that will give you nightmares. I love a grab bag essay collection where a bunch of very different creators talk about how they make stuff. It is a combination of a concept art book and a how to think about video games book that doesn't assume you know the industry, because it's made for essentially a museum of art history and domestic art history. So they can talk about very sophisticated things, but they don't assume you know any terminology about video game mechanics. So it's a very cool amalgam of an art book and a video game book and a philosophy book. It's one of the most no-brainer purchases I made after I checked out of that exhibition. And I've reached for this book a lot, honestly, to come up with thoughts on what to talk about in some specific episodes. For example, someone talks about verb or actions in a game and how, like, what are you verbing? Like, what is the person supposed to be doing, and in addition to how they're feeling? And they talk about literally how they're doing their Unity file breakdowns and Photoshops, all kinds of little things, versus how they plot The Last of Us over multiple, how they plotted the story of Last of Us over multiple games, and like when they decided to break between the two titles in the series. It's just a really cool way to think about games. I think they were, Splatoon, the whole thing is about style and fashion. It's not about Splatoon physics. It's just literally about how they were taking street art and graffiti style, and then how they designed cool streetwear based on that.
Honestly, that is the thing that endures about Splatoon.
That was the point of the exhibition, is that, or the exhibition, rather, is that what is the most interesting thing about your game? Talk only about that. Don't talk about anything else. And they worked with the designers. For example, Kentucky Route Zero said there's a lot of stuff interesting about the game, and they said, we want to talk about how you take inspiration from art and other non-video game aspects. Which paintings in the V&A inspired you? We'll put it next to the exhibition, and you'll talk about it in this article.
That's super cool. Someday I need to borrow that book from you. That sounds really cool, especially the Kentucky Route Zero part, which I would love to read.
Yes, it is UK £25, so probably about $35 US, which I think was a steal. I mean, the other art books I was going to talk about are real basic stuff for the most part. I mean, I like a Hyrule Historia, which is the book Nintendo put out for the history of 25th anniversary of Link.
Hmm.
It has a timeline of where all the games happen.
A controversial timeline.
A controversial timeline. Nevertheless, a timeline. But I like it for the concept art section where you learn, like, Ganondorf's nose is supposed to look like a carving knife, or like which different art styles inspired which Zeldas. That's stuff I can't get enough of. I love concept art in general, and very seldomly have I been able to see anything but finished character sketches in concept art books. This one really gave me the goods. Lots of early stage maps. It is a very basic choice, I admit. I think it was a New York Times bestseller, but I still really like it. It's normally, it didn't have to go that hard. It's a pretty, like, Nintendo could have really phoned it in.
I'm glad that, I've always heard that's pretty cool. I'm not quite big enough Zelda fan to go and pick up that, like, massive tome, but it does seem interesting.
From the library. They will have a copy.
That's a good point. I never thought about that.
I pick it up and look at it when I'm playing a Zelda game. It is not when I'm looking at all the time. I'm not referencing it as often, but when I'm playing a Zelda game and I want to know, where did Tingle come from? It will tell me. Like, oh, here's a shot of Tingle without the hood. How weird does that look? I like that stuff. My last one in the art book category, I've talked about on the show. It is a tiny art book called Dogs in Video Games, a risographed encyclopedia of dogs in video games. And I got this at a zine fair. You may or may not be able to still buy it. I know that the author, who is the Instagram account at Dogs in Video Games, they are working on the special edition Gold Rush DLC second publishing of the physical book. So I know that it will soon be available to you. But all this book is a 4-color risograph, special printing of a dog in a video game, a screenshot of the dog in the video game, and a description of the dog. So, Missile, Ghost Trick Phantom Detective, 2010, developed by Capcom for the Nintendo 3DS. Missile is a Pomeranian, belonging to Camilla, one of the main characters in Ghost Trick. Missile is extremely enthusiastic and barks at nearly everything that moves. Missile is named after writer Shu Takumi's own Pomeranian in real life. And then a bunch of shots of the good girl. That's it. That's the whole book. Every page, a new dog in video games. It's delightful. It's the smallest art book I own. And I have put it out sometimes on my shelf because every time someone sees it, they pick it up and look through it. Like, who wouldn't?
Yeah.
Like, people who don't play video games are like, a whole book on dogs in video games? Man, I need to meet Dog, the dog from Super Mario Odyssey.
Oh, that is such a good dog.
It has a hat because you can't take over Dog. Super Mario Odyssey, for those who didn't play, anything not wearing a hat you can possess. And they didn't want you possessing this good boy, so the good boy wears a fedora. And it
that was such a genius little design thing from that game because, like, you take over other creatures by throwing your hat onto them, and how do you prevent that for certain creatures? Oh, they just already have a hat. You can't do it. They already have a hat.
And if you try to throw the hat at the dog will catch your hat in its mouth and run around with it for a minute.
Love it.
Before giving it back to you. A fact I know because of the book Dogs in Video Games.
Oh, man. That's great.
What a delight. I had more art books from video games that were very concept art heavy of games that I didn't play but I liked looking at. They all got Marie Kondo'd in the move. These are the ones that, like, made it through the fire and flame because I love them so much.
Yeah. I don't have a ton of other art books specifically. I guess, like, if I really go and look somewhere, I have, like, a couple of books that, like, came with deluxe editions. Like, I'm pretty sure I have, like, a Persona 5 art book that is like a an add-on for the, like, deluxe edition of the game or something like that. But I don't have a ton of other stuff like that. I was looking through the game related books that I do have that are, and they kind of fall into a couple of other categories. The biggest other category for me is history, game history, which kind of relates to your Victoria and Albert book, because that's, I wouldn't say that's exactly like, that sort of straddles the line of, like, game history.
Essay collection.
Yeah. And most of the ones that I have here are more just sort of straight books on game history. A few that I specifically would recommend. Laura, I'll leave you to talk about the 50 Years of Text Games, because I know we both loved it. I have a few others here. One that I liked quite a bit is, and this is an older book, it's been through a number of editions, but Chris Kohler wrote a book called Power Up: How Japanese Video Games Gave the World an Extra Life. I don't love that subtitle, but it is what it is. This is actually a really good book on just sort of like the history of Japan and video games. It's been a number of years since I've read it. But Chris Kohler, he's like the real deal. He's written for a zillion different gaming websites, but like he really applied himself here. This book is great. I think if I recall correctly, I wonder, did I get this at? No. Yes. This is my autographed copy, because I met him at a convention and bought his book there. But it's a great book. I really encourage people to check it out. You can get this, on Kindle and whatnot, but the printed version is nice because it is nicely laid out. It has a lot of screenshots in it, and it's just like a really nicely done book. I'm trying to figure out what the year this was published. Doesn't say in this copy. 2005. So again, like mostly this is talking about like, the 80s and 90s, and there's certainly some like new details about some of the stuff in here that have come out, but I think it still holds up. It's a really, really well done book. Another book that I really like that is a little bit more academic, and hence it's actually kind of hard to get your hands on in some ways, but I bought it and I really, really enjoyed it. This is a book called I Am Error, which is a book about the Nintendo Entertainment System and Famicom by Nathan Altice, and is part of a series called the Platform Studies series. This is a really interesting sort of academic game writing project or something. I'm not sure what you call it, but the long and short of it is that what's his name? Trying to find surely he's name checked here. Ian Bogost and Nick Manafort started this series with a book called Racing the Beam that is a technical study of the Atari 2600. And that one I have not read, but it's a very academic book about they're kind of the series is called Platform Studies. It's their idea is to try to study like computing and video game platforms as like, in this sort of through this academic lens of like, how did the business and the art and everything affect the development of the technical platform, of the specific game. Mostly these are about game consoles. And how do the technical limitations and advantages and factors of the console affect the art of video games made on that device? And it's really, really fascinating. And this one, I Am Error, is really interesting because it goes into a lot of like really crunchy technical detail about how the NES actually works, and then tells a lot of interesting anecdotes about specific games, but also just sort of like big picture stuff about like how, well, obviously the NES was like this massive hit, but like why? Like what about the technical aspects of the NES affected the game design of the era and, made it a success? And it's just a really, really interesting book. And there have been a few others. I'm actually currently working my way through, I'm trying to remember the title because I don't have this one physically. I've just got an ebook of it, but there's another book in the series about the SNES called like Spoody Bards something or other. Like I'll look it up anyway. But there's another book about the SNES that has a really interesting thesis. I'm kind of like halfway through it right now. I put it down to read more novels because sometimes these are kind of academic. These are like I Am Error. You can't get this as an ebook. And it's published by like MIT Press or something like that. It's not something that you can easily like. You can buy this on Amazon, but it's there's no like paperback of it, for example. Like this is a academic book, but it is a interesting and I think kind of fun book. The SNES one has a really weird premise where it kind of tries to make the argument that actually the SNES is where Nintendo started screwing up and like they were coasting. It's like kind of making the argument that actually the NES is a success in spite of itself, and that it's actually not a great console in many interesting technical ways, but also like business And it's like where the wheels fell off of Nintendo's like ultra controlled economic system for the NES. You know, Nintendo had this like ultra controlled system for like how they allowed developers to release games on their platform in the NES, and it led them to like massive profits. And the SNES, they tried to apply that same model, and it began to fall apart, leading to basically they lost the console. Like they started out that generation with like 99% control over like video game market, and like they ended that generation with like under 50%. And like, why did that happen? Like what went wrong with this console that everyone considers this like one of the greatest video game consoles of all time, but why was it not a success? Why did it take Nintendo from essentially the only player to almost a bit player? And they took many generations to come back from that. Like, look at everything after that. And it was a continued downward spiral. So it's a really interesting look at like the video game business, in addition to like the technical aspects, as well as like the art and enjoying games, and like, hey, this is a cool game. Like, it's interesting to read a game that's like, hey, the SNES is actually a huge failure. Like, quite a thing to say. But it's a really interesting argument. So those books are great. I would really recommend them. And then like, just a quick other thing about some other like history related games. This is a book that I got as another gift from Shane, and I really appreciate it. I kind of treat this one in similarly to the art books I was talking about before, but it's more of a history. This is The Secret History of Mac Gaming. This is a nice, beautiful tome. I'm holding it up, but like, I love the way this book looks. The front of it is like a beautiful pixel art version of like an original Macintosh playing some kind of maze game. On the back cover, you see the back of that Macintosh. It's a beautiful book.
The edges of the pages are all bright blue.
It's not coming through properly. It's more of a purple in real life. It's like this cool like purple color, and it's just full of beautiful old artwork and just writing about old Mac games, something that doesn't get a lot of writing about it, because like the Macintosh was like despite Apple's best efforts, it was a really interesting gaming platform. And there were a ton of really unique games for it that never came to anything else, because the original Macintosh and the first few models after that were like, they're very, very unique and idiosyncratic. They're all black and white in an era when most games on other platforms were going color. High resolution screen compared to the other devices of the era. Like, games on the Macintosh looked and played differently. Most Mac owners had a mouse and no game paddle. No game joystick. And so most games had to be playable with a mouse at an era when that was very uncommon. So like, really unique platform for games. And most of the games on that platform are kind of forgotten. So I'm love old Mac stuff. I find this book really, there's a new edition of this. This is the old edition. There's a new edition that has some updates and stuff. This is still available as well. So highly recommend that one as well. I think that's it for me for history books. Although I guess I'll mention that I read it digitally as well. I really enjoyed Console Wars. I think everybody did. That came out several years ago. They're making a mini series out of it with Seth Rogen. I think that's still happening. I love that era of gaming. And I would love if anybody has any suggestions on, like, I really like books about game history, but there aren't that many of them. And I'm never sure which of them are like interesting to read. If you have a book about like game history, especially if it like includes like interviews with creators, or if it's a little more narrative, something like Console Wars, really just anything that, goes into that side of things, like, let me know. I'm always, I guess I already mentioned it on the show. I've read 2 books about the development of Doom. When we did the Doom episode, I talked about reading John Romero's what do you call it? Sort of autobiography, memoirs about the development of Doom, and also his life before that and after it up to the present. I love books like that. So if you have any suggestions about books like that, let me know, because I'm always looking for more.
Excellent. And I will pick up the thread from a bit ago of my favorite history book on games. And one of my best games on books, I think, is the 50 Years of Text Games book by Aaron Reed. This ruled before it was a book, when it was just very, very excellent essays on the site. But to quote Emily Short, this book is thoroughly researched and full of joy. The premise of it is that for every year, starting with 19 flipping pages. They cover the last 50 years of text games, very, very in detail, starting with 1971, The Oregon Trail, going up to Sense and Semiosis by Kat Manning, and Sam Ashwell produced. I don't know if he's credited. I would know if I went deeper in the book, but it's got so many. The reason I'm unsure what's in the book is because I've read the Further Explorations, which is an additional 85 pages. This sucker is 620 pages, and every page is interesting. I think when I first was introduced to this project, I read all of the games I had played. I read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Oregon Trail. I read King of Dragon Pass, Kingdom of Loathing, Fallen London, my fave. Howling Dogs, 80 Days, Lifeline. I was just playing, reading, and loving the explanations of things that I'd played. But while I was waiting for the book to be published, and Kickstarter backing, I started reading the other articles, and there were so many interesting things. There is The Beast, which is the weird AI game, not AI, artificial intelligence, the movie. It's not an AI game. It is a online ARG, alternate reality game, that I played a tiny tail of when I was young, because it was a weird internet thing and I was into that. Finding out what else was happening in The Beast was incredible. And then I started looking at things I had no history with. There are cults in here. There are interesting technological achievements. There's every language in the world of text game in here. The book version has beautiful side notes explaining more about games. They have explanations of code, so you know why Inkle works the way it does. It is so interesting whether or not you've played the games. What a good history textbook. I think one of the favorite discoveries of this book was even just the timeline and seeing the way people structure these. I've played Twine, I've modeled them for work, but being able to actually see maps and see what the information architecture was of all these games really was not only interesting intellectually, but I found myself using it at work because I'm in user experience, and how people classified decision trees, how people classified things really was fascinating. So that's my number one choice, is this 50 years of text game and the extra bit. But I will say, not in history, but you mentioned Ian Bogost. There's that personal history, like, essay about video games collection. I've read 2 of those. One is How to Talk About Video Games. Did you read that one?
I don't think so. Remind me about that.
It's Ian Bogo's book. It's an essay collection, and it includes the one that you might have read is The Squalid Grace of Flappy Bird.
No, I don't think I've read that, but that's a great title.
Yes, it was originally published in The Atlantic about, like, playing stupid games can ward off existential despair as the tagline. But it's all of Ian Bogo's writing about games as ways to think about ourselves and our culture, and how to talk about video games and in our lives. The other one in this genre is Extra Lives, Why Video Games Matter by Tom Bazell, which I recently talked about because that's the one where he does cocaine and plays Grand Theft Auto. There's other essays in that collection, but both are really interesting of, like, how does a critic who is in an academic or a literary space who loves video game justify those 2 hobbies? Like, how can you meld those two, especially when you talk to people who don't think that video games are important? Another one in that Ian Bogost book, just because it's fresher, I read it earlier this year, is The Blue Shell is Everything That's Wrong with America. Excellent titles. I think both of them are just interesting to talk about. They can be very high-minded, but also very dumb. And I think while we're swimming in personal essay collections, ones that are only about video games, it's an interesting side genre.
Yeah, I think I should probably read more of those. Like, I don't. Ian Bogost is one of those people, like, a lot of people have an opinion about his writing and work and whatnot. And I honestly haven't read that much of his stuff. I think I've probably read more of his tweets than I have of his actual writing. But I think, it's interesting at the very least. So I'd like to read that. That sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, Extra Lives was published back in 2011. So I think there are probably more of these in this format. But it used to be that you just had to be a literary dude and you could get an essay collection with video games in the title.
It occurs to me, I think I actually have that. Years ago, there was a Humble bundle that was like all video game books, and there were a bunch of things in it, many of them that proved to be kind of uninteresting. But I think that was in that collection. I think I have an ebook of that. I should go back through my files and see if I can find it. I think I already technically own that.
Probably. I also bought that bundle, and I looked at it and I said, why did I do this? I don't read ebooks that often. Why did I do this? The physical books remind me to read them. I've got one last little category of book.
Okay.
Unless you get something.
I mean, I've got one other category that's a pretty short one, so you go first.
Okay. I use game design books a lot because I started off very briefly in game industry. I have worked at a gaming adjacent startup, but I use the card deck from The Art of Game Design by Jesse Shull all the time at work. It's a physical giant card deck called A Deck of Lenses from The Art of Game Design. And what it is every chapter of the book, the premise is that you need to think about a bunch of different lenses when you think about game design. Game design is not one thing. You need to keep looking at the game like a kaleidoscope, turning it and looking at it slightly differently. And there are, the cards are out of order, but there's 100, I think, lenses. There's 100 in the deck. I don't know if there's 100 in life. I have split it into relevant to my current job and irrelevant to my current job. Because it turns out there are quite a lot of things that are not relevant to working for the federal government.
You're not thinking about jump heights when you're thinking about building websites for the government.
Yeah. For example, one of the irrelevant to my current job, well, mostly is number 42, the lens of head and hands. To make sure your game has a good balance of mental and physical elements, use this lens. Ask yourself questions like, are my players looking for mindless action or an intellectual challenge? Would adding more places that involve puzzle solving make it more interesting? Are there places where the player can relax their brain and play the game without thinking? Can I give the player a choice, either by succeed by exercising a high level of dexterity or by finding a clever strategy that works with a minimum of physical skill? And then, if 1 means all physical and 10 means all mental, what number would my game get? Yeah, that one's in the irrelevant game. But it's very good to think about when I'm doing stuff like the short game of okay, what is the balance? Is the puzzle game all think, no break? Things that are relevant to my games are stuff like the pitch, which is how would you pitch the game to a client, or the lens of transformation, which is how is my game going to change player for the better? How could it change them for the worst? The lens of responsibility. Does my game help people? How is the game worth my time?
Ding.
What is my purpose of working on it? Am I making the game better? That kind of stuff I find helpful to look at when I'm stuck. There's one called indirect control of how can you essentially manipulate players to do things that are good for them. All of this stuff is interesting to talk about in any design problem. Again, maybe the lens of head and heart is not helpful to you, or the elemental tetrad, but the lens of meaningful choices is very interesting when you're trying to help somebody, register to vote.
Mm-hmm.
Does this feel meaningful? Or is it only meaningful to me, is one of the questions. Ooh, maybe I should slow down and think. So
I like the idea of like a deck for that sort of thing, and it's I think I'm familiar with things like the like oblique strategies deck from I think who is it David?
Yeah, I am so much more of a fan of grabbing decks that have nothing to do with my job and making them work for my job rather than the ones made for me.
That's interesting.
Maybe I'm just a contrarian, but outside of a deck of cards for helping have better one-on-ones when you're managing people, which was super helpful, I find a lot of the oblique strategies or like brainstorming decks to not help as much as ones that are like, what are the ways you think about designing information in general, information architecture cards, or how do you think about designing an experience, which is what this deck is in general. It's a cool thing. I like the book too. Someone at work, not this job, I work remotely. It would be very scary if someone at work did. But someone at a previous job stole my copy of the book, The Art of Game Design. I don't know who, but I still have the deck of cards. And I think the cards basically are the book. So I recommend both. The cards are, if you don't like reading, sorry for listening, 46 minutes in.
What are you doing on this episode, guy?
Get out of here. But if you just want to kind of like sift through a physical deck of cards and think about what is interesting to talk about in the game. It reminds me of the V&A book. Like, what is interesting about this game? Is it the balance? Is it surprise? Is it grabbing a random card? Is it griefing? Which I don't remember what that is. It is... it's grinding. Like, does it require grinding?
Interesting. Yeah.
I don't know.
Cool. That's an interesting thing to be able to apply to things other than game design too. So I have a couple last things that are like quick one-offs that don't really quite have a category to them. One is that this is something I wish I had more of, and I don't, but I have a couple. Is game guides. Like there used to be a whole industry of publishing sometimes really interestingly designed visual like walkthrough guides for video games. Back in the like PlayStation RPG era, like every game would also get like a fancy, well-produced guide that would basically be like a graphical walkthrough for the game. And that, is a thing that you don't really get anymore. Some games do still get like art books are much more common, but like, and I'm sure there are some games like big things like, some of the Assassin's Creeds or what have you that might still get like this kind of guide treatment, but it's pretty uncommon. And it's especially uncommon for the type of games that I play. So that's not something I really get very much, but I love these things as objects. I don't have really any old ones. Like I look at PDFs of these if I'm playing through something like, when we were playing Castlevania Symphony of the Night, for example, like I found like a PDF of the 90s. I think it was like Brady Games, like guide for it. Loved that. It wasn't quite as useful as like literally looking things up on YouTube, which is, I think, what's replaced almost all video game guides is like video walkthroughs. But in some ways it was a better experience. It was cool to leaf through it. And it's a way of like experiencing parts of the game in a way that's different from the game itself. I love those. So the only ones of those that I actually have that I really enjoy are a couple of modern produced ones from about Earthbound and Mother 3 that I forget what the company that produced these was. They're sold through Fangamer. I think you can still get these. I think I got these as part of some kind of a Kickstarter when they were originally like producing them. But they are really great. So Earthbound had an incredible guide, but it's hundreds of dollars now. And it's really, it came packaged with the book. They were not like, they did not expect Earthbound to do well. And one of the ways that they mitigated that was like they sold you this $100 box that had the game and like a full walkthrough guide in the box with the game when you bought it. This is like somebody took the time to like basically remake that, but it's entirely new. So all new art, all new description of the game. It's got like essays and things about the game in it. It's clearly like a labor of love. The one for Mother 3 was more like they were trying to like recreate, like what would it have looked like if we got that incredible guide from Earthbound, but for Mother 3, which didn't get a similar guide. And so it's got a full walkthrough of the game, tons of original art, illustrations of all of the characters. It's just an incredible document. Like, it's really, really great. And if you're playing through Mother 3 and you want like an incredible thing to sit next to you on your table that you can like look at while you're playing the game, to really enhance the experience, it's great. And this is also I think it's by a number of people, but Clyde Mandolin, I think I'm getting his name right, who did the translation of Mother 3, was involved in this guide as well, I believe. And then also, like, related to this would be the Legends of Localization games books, which are by Clyde Mandolin. I've only got 2 of them. I think there's a third one that I don't have. The first one was, this is a book all about the localization of The Legend of Zelda, which doesn't seem like it would have that much to it because it is a book. It's a game with that much text in it, but it's actually pretty fascinating. It's goes into like the background of the game and, things about the game that might have been distinctly Japanese and how they brought that across. It goes into some of the things like, I am error, things like that people thought was a glitch in the game for many years and actually was a localization issue. Like, really beautiful books as well. They're just gorgeous, like full color hardback books, just absolutely incredible books, full of beautiful screenshots, lots of great text, very insightful, interesting stuff. The Legends of Localization was a web series of articles for years before he started publishing these gorgeous books. But like, you can get these as well, I believe, through Fangamer, and man, they're great. They're really great books. The second one is about Earthbound, similarly incredible, also very, very weighty tome. If you like Earthbound and you want to like think about how did they localize this game, which has one of the most incredible localizations of all time. Incredible book.
There are 2 things that I keep staring at Fangamer, and I haven't bought yet. But if anyone wants to influence me into just pulling the trigger in the Discord, I could be influenced. One is they have a hardcover physical reproduction of the Tunic in-game manual.
Ooh, I want that.
I want that too. I haven't bought it. I'd like to pretend someone would give it to, like, some of my family would give it to me for Christmas. They're not going to, but I'm hoping there'll be a Fangamer sale and I'll pick it up and I'll just impulse buy it. I'm gonna get this book. It needs to be in my life. I love Tunic and I love the manual. That's the thing I love about Tunic the most. The other book is something that I'm trying to see if it's something that my husband would like, because he loves watching speedrunning and he loves watching speedrunning explanation videos. They've bought a book called Speedrun Science, A Long Guide to Short Playthroughs, where they talk about like the motivations and principles and the evolution of speedrunning and like why people, like how people find exploits. And they've done a lot of community interviews. It is very hard to gauge if this would be completely duplicative of everything he knows or if it would be the perfect present. So thinking about that, also, I might just want to read it because I think it's going to be very interesting to... I watched a lot of YouTube videos and I've watched a lot of GDQ, but I haven't really had anyone talk about like how in general one would go about starting in it. And I think this might be a cool way to read about speedrunning without having to learn about the history of every game that's ever been speedrun, which would be impossible.
Yeah.
So this person apparently specializes in obscure speedrunning games. So they know he knows he can't write about that. So he talks about generally like how one would speedrun. I have never tried to speedrun. That's not how I play games, but I find it a really interesting way to enjoy games. And I find it mesmerizing to watch. So
yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah. This is not sponsored by Fangamer. I just spend too much money there.
Yeah. The last thing I'll leave you with is that, so video games and novels don't really cross the streams for me very often. Most of the time, novels about video games or game characters or based in game worlds seem kind of cringe or lame to me. But there's one novel I've read over the last few years that is specifically about video games and video game development that I would recommend to almost anybody. And that was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. Did you read that one, Laura?
Yes, I second this. I paused reading it at a very funny time. So I've had a very strange version of the game of reading this book where I paused, I recommended to someone, kept reading, and then had to call that person and due to personal circumstance in their life, be like, wait, don't read this book, please don't read this book. But which if you've read it, you'll get it. But man, it is so interesting the way they talk about creativity and video games as personal exploration and video games as money machines and like the crunch periods, but also the creativity in a crunch period. All of it seems so true in a way that I haven't experienced personally, but it feels so good. And I've heard people who don't play video games love this book too.
Yeah, I think so. It's a it's sort of literary fiction. It's a story about a complicated friendship. Maybe more, not necessarily, certainly more than your average friendship between
intense,
in a very intense relationship between these two people who are video game developers. And it covers a fairly lengthy chapter of their lives from their, when they first meet each other and develop their first games together through their career. And it's all fiction, but it feels real enough. Like it draws a lot on real video game history. Like the games that it talks about them creating feel at least on some level mostly plausible. This is an issue that I have with a lot of games that or books that use games as an element, is like the games don't feel like plausibly from reality. These games mostly do. But the games that they develop also say something interesting about the people that are making them and the and the relationship between them. It's a really, really good book. I would totally recommend it to anybody who likes like literary fiction and or video games. Like if you like the games we cover, you should give this book a chance. Yeah, it's pretty cool. This book loves the games we cover. Mm-hmm. For many of the reasons that we love them, it's exactly. It's interested in games as art and not just in the abstract, but like this very concrete, like, here's a person and, what sort of games do they make and what does it say about them and so on. It's really good. So I think I'm out of books. But listeners, if you have, Laura, did you have anything left? Oh, no, I just was staring at the giant pile of books and thinking about how much I want to reread them. Yes, please do the outro. Yeah, listeners, if you have any video game related books that you love, we would love to hear about them. I'm always up for, I'm an e-reader guy now, so I'm always up for grabbing a book and checking it out. Let me know. I'll hit Libby or wherever. Let me know. Love to get some recommendations. So hit us up. Best place to do that is our Discord. Listener, you can find everything you need to know about the short game on shortgame.fm. But the most important thing you will find there is a link to our Patreon page, patreon.com/theshortgame, which is where you can find out how to support the show. And if you support the show, you get access to our Discord community. That is where we talk about the games that we're playing and talk about episodes that are upcoming. We plan things. We get suggestions for games from our listeners. Listeners give suggestions for games to each other. There's actually a really big part of what happens on the Discord is just people talking about short video games and, maybe not even stuff that we're covering on the show. What do you like? What's up for you? It's a great place to talk about that kind of thing if you like the kinds of games that we do. Anybody supporting the show at $3 a month or more gets access to that community. We would love to have you. Please do join us there. You can also find links to all of our socials there. I'm Raygan Kelly. And I'm Laura Nash. And thank you once again for joining us on this episode of The Short Game. Bye. Happy reading.